Hey there, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'd like to share a conversation that I had with Kirk Hunter of Kirk Hunter Studios. Kirk's been in the sampling game since the late 90s and made a name for himself with the Virtuoso series of instruments, which were widely used. And then more recently, he launched the Kinetic series, including Kinetic strings. It features a clever system where you can just hold down keys and play various string ostinato patterns, which you create yourself using the plugin. And it garnered a 5-star rating in Sound on Sound. I just spent the afternoon playing around with his latest string library. It's called Concert Strings Adaptive. I've been told it's set to release on the 22nd of February, which is tomorrow at the time of posting this video, and you can check out a full playthrough and demonstration over on my YouTube channel as well. I'll leave a link in the description. But yeah, we just got straight into it really, and it was really nice to just get a little bit of an insight into Kirk's world and just more generally the world of creating sample libraries. So without further ado, here's the conversation. Thanks very much for watching.
So how did you enjoy it? What was your first take on the thing as you played live?
Oh, well, I think playing live is the key phrase, right? I feel like you've spent a lot of time optimizing it for just having it all under your fingers. That appeals to me because of my background as an improviser. Before I was doing composing full time, I was doing jazz gigs and kind of bits and pieces of work, teaching and things. And
I see.
yeah, and I've always enjoyed approaching composing from a kind of real-time improvisation standpoint. I'm big into breath controllers and sort of anything that gives me like
Oh,
touch or whatever.
speaking of that, I contacted the firm that produces your controller, TEC, I think it is,
Yes.
and they're sending me one to give it a try. So I'll be doing hopefully some videos once I get adept on the thing to use it. So I've never used a breath controller before, so it'll be interesting to try that out.
Do you play any wind instruments? I know you're a string player as well.
No, I do not.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your experience. I have a bit of a saxophone playing background, so I've found it fairly intuitive off the bat. But I mean, yeah, I don't know. I've been using it so long on my projects now, it's hard to imagine programming strings, especially without it. But yeah, that's exciting. I mean, for what it's worth, using the library you sent me with the breath controller, it felt very good, just without any particular optimization for breath control.
How did you set it up for your particular playing style with the breath controller? Like, which CCs did you use?
I was literally just using CC11 for dynamics, and then I used the byte, which is CC18 in my case, for vibrato. And those were the only two that I was controlling in real time. So I used the independent vibrato control version.
When you say you use the byte, does
Yeah.
that mean it's a pressure thing, or is it just a repetitive, like a constant? Is like you just chew down on it, or
Yeah.
do you release chew to control the speed of the vibrato? Right?
Yeah, it's basically no byte is 0 and full byte is 127.
Got it. Okay.
So there's some degree of, it's a bit limited, but there's some degree of nuance you can get.
It's like a pressure aftertouch. Okay.
Yeah. But what's nice is the tech control comes with its own app, which is super simple, and it allows you to map things in different ways and change the curves to your liking and things like that. I found that with this library, I found myself setting the decay settings. So like with CC11, basically you can control it so that when you stop breathing, it doesn't immediately cut off the CC11 to 0, but there's like a release time. And so I found that was quite helpful. Otherwise, it can be quite severe. Like
you should know that the library was specifically programmed for cases like what you are doing.
Oh, great.
For example, if you were to use the mod wheel, let's say for dynamics, and you would slam that wheel down really fast, the dynamics will not follow that way. They will fade down or fade up. It's designed to not be so intense, because I like using various controllers at the same time, and sometimes when they conflict or whatever, you can get this sort of stair-stepping thing.
Yes.
So the thing uses contacts lag control underneath the hood to avoid that kind of thing. So that's probably good in your case.
Cool. Yeah. I definitely got that sense. I mean, it's nice. You can kind of with velocity, you can see the values changing on the user interface, and I can kind of, I can hear. I actually had a peek under the hood as well to see some of the knobs moving as I was performing, and yeah, like I appreciate that you've spent quite a lot of time optimizing that. Again, just I think with fun in mind. Is that fair to say? With kind of just that having that connection with the instrument as a performer.
Well, when I compose, I'm a keyboard player, but primarily a violinist, violist. But I like to do mock-ups first and then later separate my parts out. And I know half the people out there don't do it that way, so you can certainly break it up. But I like just being able to slam down something nice. And also I come from a background of live performance, and it's like, well, I want something I can just play live and it feels right. So that's where I started. And then, of course, separating it out. So but honestly, I have to say, it doesn't go without saying that a huge amount of attention was paid to get the right sound, the right vibe. I like a big sound. The church where I recorded it has an amazingly beautiful sound, and I really wanted to get kind of a warm sound without sounding muddy. So, yeah, it's fun to play. Yeah, it responds, but second to none is the way I think it's going to sound.
Can you talk a bit about the recording session? I'm really curious because I don't know a huge amount about sample library development. I'm just an end user. So, and you're the first sample library developer I've met, actually. So, at least had a face-to-face conversation with. So, I'd be really curious to know, the kinds of decisions that you're making in the room and how much you've kind of designed the plugin before you go into record, or how much of it's kind of working it out once you have the sample material and things like that.
If I told you, I'd have to kill you. No, I'm kidding.
Of course.
I'll give you this. Honestly, it's pretty much flying by the seat of my pants because every room is different. I have performed in this room as principal violist in the a great LA orchestra by the name of Vicente Chamber Orchestra, led by Zain Khan.
Okay.
And I remember the minute I performed there, I thought, wow, this thing sounds great. I wonder how an orchestra would sound in here. The recording technique was rather straightforward. I used 3 sets. I used overheads at the very back of the room, and I used the Decca mics that were. There's not really a stage in this room, so it was kind of like, let's put it where I think a sweet spot is, and then the spot mics that were really pretty close. And honestly, just with a pair of headphones, because there's no sound booth in the place, so I had to rely on my headphones. Like, do this take. How does that sound?
Yeah.
I thought, well, that's going to be good. So then getting home, a few EQ tweaks and stuff, and pretty much out of the box, that's the way it was.
Nice. So
I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, like you say, this particular library anyway, it has quite a large sound, quite a kind of lush sound. And I guess like one of the sample libraries I use most on projects is the Cinematic Studio series.
Right.
And that's by contrast, it's got a very gritty, very close, quite dry sound. So, I would say this one for me is quite a nice complement to that. There are other libraries that I have that do that. I guess things like the Spitfire libraries that are a bit lusher, but for whatever reason, I've never quite gotten with those libraries myself. The Symphonic series in particular. I think again, what sort of drew me like a moth to a flame with your stuff is just the playability. Because it's like you say, I'm very much of the school of just getting stuff in, just throwing in ideas and kind of thinking big picture at the first stage of the creative process anyway. And then, like you say, kind of figure out the details later, figure out how to split it. And
did you play with any of the presets? For instance, it's very big and lush, but you can go down to bone dry, which if you do that, it's pretty much slamming in your face.
Yes.
I don't know if you tried it or not.
I did actually, in the context more of trying it with different reverbs and putting it through Altiverb and putting it through Valhalla and stuff like that, and just figuring out what kind of colors I could get. That's something that I really appreciate as well, is just having that ability to dial in the tone that is appropriate for a particular track. Although I haven't actually used it in any compositions yet, I've only just been playing
It's too
around.
soon.
So,
yeah. Did you play with the one of the things I spent a real long time with were the different legatos. Did you play with those?
yes, yeah. I spent a bit of time. I just programmed a very simple sequence of notes and had it looping round, and then
Okay.
just kind of switched between the different legato options and kind of tried to really hear what was going on. Although, to be honest, for the most part, I found myself sticking with how it loaded up pretty much.
The polyphonic legato?
Yeah, polyphonic and true legato, and not low change one. I found that was kind of the best coverall in a lot of situations.
It's funny because when I first programmed the true legato, my first opinion was like, okay, this is sounding way too, the transitions were kind of in your face. And I thought, well, they're too loud. So that's why I did the lesser one. But then once I started composing, once it's in a mix, the true legato sounded, in my opinion, more authentic.
Well, I think that's a really important point, is I'm very hesitant to kind of give strong opinions about anything until I've really composed with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Excited.
And if you do, if and when you do, let me know. I'd love to hear it.
I mean, I'm sure you have many other composers with better, who can give you a better feedback than I can. But I'll certainly let you know any thoughts I have.
Well, that's very candid of you to say, but once I release something and I get back to, a lot of the composers don't get back to me. They're of that list where they kind of just do their thing and move on. I don't really get their demos that often. Every so often I do, but and I'm also very picky about posting them. If they're really great, it's like, yeah, I'll put it up. But if not, it's like, like I say, you can get the greatest sample libraries to sound terrible.
Oh yeah, big time. Yes. So do you work with composers? Presumably you get some feedback as you're developing a product and kind of.
I do.
But what does that look like in terms of?
I have a list of composers and producers that are split in half. It's a list is split in half.
Mm-hmm.
One set is like you, who I assume you're a keyboard player first, right?
Yeah.
Okay. They're primarily keyboard players where they like to play live. And the other players are the ones who like to do, I call trackzilla in their DAW. They're like, marcados, spiccatos, everything's split out, which both are completely valid. And so as a developer, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that when you go to develop something, unless you start getting a template like I have. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question, that's the kind of list I use. People, and I literally go to their studios, listen to the way it sounds in other studios, get a lot of feedback from them. And luckily there are quite a few here in LA.
Yeah.
With whom I have good relationship that I can visit. Mm-hmm. And they've been extremely important in the development of this library, as well as many others.
Yeah.
But especially this one, because this one I really wanted to bring something different to the table. I've done a bunch of string libraries, but not a big symphonic library like this in a really, really long time. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of funny. When I went back to my old ones, I was like, oh, that's a little cringy. I could have done so much better. But, we're talking back in the early 2000s. So I don't know if that answers your question in the long way or not.
Oh, yeah, I'm just loving getting a little insight into that world, and like you say, LA is just total kind of hotspot for all of the top composers. And so I'm imagining, that's the best possible place you could be if you want to make something that's really going to hit the spot.
Well, another angle on that is, the composers I use are not necessarily always film composers. A lot of them are pop. A lot of them do rap. A few jazzy guys. Although, Bruce, are you familiar with Bruce Miller? He does a lot of, he's kind of on the jazz side. He did the theme song for a very popular TV series back here in the 90s called Frasier.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So he's been helpful. He's one of those guys like you who uses a breath controller. And he's funny because, just as an anecdote, when I go to his studio, he's always like, Kirk, I gotta tell you, if it doesn't work with this wind controller, I'm not gonna use it, so it's better. I was like, all right, let's give it a try. And he goes, wait a minute, shut up, let me test it. And so he does it. And then if he likes it, he goes, good, you did this. I'm gonna have to call XYZ other developer and say, hey, Kirk did it this way. You guys better hurry and do it that way. For what it's worth. For what it's worth.
Yeah. That's lovely. You mentioned briefly there just about kind of the fact that it was your first big symphonic style string library in a while, and I don't know. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that decision to make this particular library and the inspiration and particular things that I guess ended up being the signature of this library and where that came from.
The honest answer to that is the room where I recorded it.
Right.
2018 is when I had joined that orchestra I had mentioned before. And as I said, when I was in that room, and I just loved it. And when I heard the recordings back from our performances, I went, damn it, these things sound really great. I wonder what it would sound like to record here. So I started by doing a smaller solo library. And I didn't put a real lot of time in that because I wasn't sure about how I was going to, I didn't even know what was really going on in the solo string library at the time. But it sounded really good at the time. And I thought, I gotta put the resources together to do at least a large string orchestra in this room. Because I think it just sounds great. So to answer your question, it was mostly that room. I just fell in love with the sound of that room. Yeah. And then I thought, well, if I can get the players together, that's kind of a slam dunk. So it's taken, quite a while to get that together, but that's what inspired me most. And the fact that I hadn't done it in a while. I told myself back when I had done the last one, I said, never again. And especially with the myriad string libraries that have come since then, I'm like, I'm just done with this. And I probably should have, but I thought, I got to give it one more shot before I die. So yeah.
It's interesting because there's I guess so much of it comes down to taste when you're talking about string.
Yeah.
And I feel like I get a sense of your taste just from playing this library, and I think like most composers, I sort of have a ton of libraries that you'll kind of reach for different ones. But I mean, I'm sorry to keep going on about it, but
That's right.
I just think the scripting or whatever magic stuff is going on under the hood to make it kind of as fluid to play. That's just something that I find so rare in string libraries or libraries in general, but string libraries in particular. It's that kind of to get something that has like enough bite and kind of weight to the sound, but isn't. So you don't feel kind of like limited with the patch that you're playing, where it's like, okay, it's great if I'm just going ba 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 ba, but the minute I try and go like ba da ba da ba da, it kind of falls apart.
Exactly.
And that just it hems you in so much when you're writing. Obviously, as I'm sure you know. You mentioned that you compose as well.
Yeah.
So I guess you're always thinking about, what tools that you have at your disposal to write the best music possible. And I don't know, is there anything out there in kind of just the sample world, either stuff that you're developing or that you're connected to, or just other products that are out there that particularly excites you as a kind of creator and as a musician, and sort of trends that you see maybe?
I have to confess that I don't really follow what you would call trends because as self-deprecating as it might sound, I do pigeonhole myself into a certain genre. I like composing very period type film score type stuff, very big, lush, although also very intimate, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
When you ask about what other products, is that what you're asking? What other products I use besides?
Yeah, and the kind of things that you enjoy using, I guess, in the creative process.
Well, it's kind of funny when I compose, I'm all about just using a piano and strings and vocals. And I have a good set of vocalists I use live. I rarely use anything sampled when it comes to choirs and stuff. Although I hear there are some really great ones. I'm not one of those guys that goes out there and grabs all the libraries. I just, if I did that, I would get so jaded. It would be like, oh my God, CSS sounds this way, and Spitfire sounds this way, or Swam sounds this way. And I would go like, and then I would go into business mode, like, okay, where can I fit in this? And I'm not like that. I just do what I like to do, and then if it works, it works. If it doesn't, hey, I have something else to use.
Oh, that's really great to hear. That's very interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's easy to lose. I find myself kind of getting a bit distracted a lot of the time by sort of weighing up different sample libraries, and kind of it just ends up taking
But that's okay. I
from.
think that's okay. I think that the job of a sample library is to distract you in a way. That's one of the things I wanted to do with the adaptive strings. I wanted to make it really fun and really like almost inspirational. But like I said, you get a psychoacoustic response when you play something, right? It's like you play it and it's like, oh, that's X. It feels X. That's my job, because if it's a positive thing, you don't even have to ask if it sounds good. It's like if it's giving you a positive feedback, then something has worked on some level.
Yeah.
So if people want to relegate this to a really playable library and not even use any other adjectives, I'm okay with that, because if it's really playable, that means people are going to want to play it.
If there was somebody listening to this who was thinking of maybe starting to get into sampling and kind of that whole area, is there anything that you'd sort of advise, or any like insight that you'd want to kind of give them, maybe any sort of pitfalls that you've avoided, or that you've challenges that you've faced and kind of wish that maybe you did it a different way when you were starting out, something like that?
Oh, hell no. I want them to go through all the crap I had to go through.
Yeah.
No, I mean, honestly, it's one of those things where if I had to, gosh, I don't know how to answer that question, because I started sampling in 1997. And there were really only 3 of us doing string libraries at the time on the planet. And that was Peter Seidlicek, I think I've pronounced that correctly, Vitus Miroslav, and myself. And before that, there was Denny Yeager, and there was, I think, a couple of others. But we were kind of it. And I got really lucky to get on the map that way, although I made a million mistakes along the way. So to answer your question, the mistakes I would stay away from are, don't try to massage the samples so much. You got to make sure that the sound is there first. That's the most important thing. Because honestly, I made that mistake, because I thought, yeah, they sound good, but I think I can make them better if I do whatever, because I'm all into that playability thing. So after a while, you get so used to what you're hearing that it could be bad and you don't remember anymore because you're so close to it. So I guess that's another thing I would say is, have fresh ears. Don't make too many decisions right then and there. Take a night's sleep or take a week off, and come back and you're going to go, oh, that is Baba lousy. I got to do something else again. Because if you're doing it every day, hours and hours, like I usually do, it's hard to stay really objective with listening to things. But anyway, I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, no, that's great. I mean, can I ask I should have asked this earlier on, but is it mainly yourself working on these projects, or how much of it is collaborative? Like, how big a team do you work with?
That's one of those answers where I would also have to say, if I told you, I would have to kill you.
Fair enough.
No, I'll be perfectly candid with you. I do everything from the ground up.
Right.
I do not have a team. I like the perception that people think I have a team, because, hey, that's a good thing. But honestly, I do it from the ground up. I record everything myself. In fact, some of the string samples, I went back and recorded myself playing just a little tad over that, just to give it a little extra bite and a little closeness. So for instance, I recorded the 12 strings, the 12 first violins at one time. Listening back, if it sounds a little too syrupy or too homogeneous, I guess, I played over that a little bit, just enough to give it a little bite. So you probably would never notice it one way or the other. But honestly, yeah, I do it all myself. Yeah. I don't do the recording engineering. I do, but I don't have the fantastic mics that are supposed to be used. So I hired a guy that has the great mics, and he wishes to remain anonymous.
Sure. And the scripting and the sort of the working contact, that's all you.
Yeah, that was an uphill climb, and I'm perfectly happy telling you that I have not crested that mountain yet, but you know.
Forgive me for asking, are most of your libraries contact based at this point?
At this point, yes.
Right.
Um, before I would say maybe 10 years or so ago, I used to develop in Logic's EXS24, but they sort of dropped the ball on updating that thing. So every so often I'll get a request for that. But before that, you know, we used to have to program in Akai, Kurzweil, all these old synths. They're now worth a fortune, by the way, if you own them. But yeah, I had to program in that stuff, and that was a different world back in the 90s.
Any plans to sort of, you know, any interest in working, you know, designing your own kind of platform for it? Yeah, sampler for it?
No interest whatsoever in developing my own player. However, I do currently have interest in developing for other very viable players out there. Will I do it? Probably not, because that would be having to broach another learning curve, programming wise and everything, that I'm just, at my age, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do that. Unless something is so compelling that can do things that Contact cannot do in a really easy way, sure, I'd love to do that. So, but Contact is pretty much the top of the heap still.
Yeah. So now that you've reached a point with this library, I mean, would you say that is it finished now? Are you still doing a few tweaks to it, or is it basically finished now, this one?
Ask any sample developer and they'll tell you nothing's ever finished.
Okay.
But are they through with it? That's a different question. This is pretty much the one you have is the release candidate.
Got it.
Sure, there's no doubt I'll get some feedback that there might be a few little issues that I might have to clean up. That's always the case.
Mm-hmm.
But this has gone through some pretty rigorous beta testing.
Yeah.
And man, this was the programming language alone is over 60,000 lines of code.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're barring any critical, massive failure, we're good to go.
You mentioned to me, and we can cut this out if you don't want to announce a date or anything, but you mentioned to me end of the month, probably looking at a release date around then. Is that still the case?
That's the plan.
Yeah.
End of February 2024. Yeah.
And
that's
then
the plan.
What's on the agenda then? I guess you're in a bit more of a marketing mode, are you? Are you kind of getting the word out? Are you straight onto
I do not do the marketing.
Okay.
So I have to backtrack on my answer with regard to do I do everything? That's what I do not do.
Uh-huh.
I hire that out, and once I've released, I'll be fielding things from them, questions, Q&A, whatever, FAQs. But once I'm done with this, then it goes on to what's the next thing, and I assume that might have been your next question.
Yeah, well, I guess so. Or whether you might be going into more of a phase of writing or doing something, quite different to sample library. It seems like you have your finger in a lot of different pies, performing as well. And
currently I am in the midst of doing a rather large product that has nothing to do with sample libraries, but that's under wraps right now. But in terms of sample libraries, yeah, the next product will be probably related to the adaptive engine. And it's likely to be the chamber strings, or maybe even solo strings, but probably the chamber strings coming up right away next. Oh. But that involves getting the string players back together again and all that. Because stupidly, I didn't record the smaller sections right there when I had a chance. I didn't think I was going to need to, but after developing this thing, it's like, oh yeah, I really got to do the chamber strings too. So probably that'll happen.
I'm so pleased that you said that, because I was going to ask about where are the chamber strings and when can I get them?
And I love chamber strings. I honestly do. I love playing in. I very routinely get a group together and we play chamber string stuff. There are a lot of Bach, a lot of Mozart, Baroque, and early classical stuff, I love that. That's just me. So yeah, I probably will be putting that together in the next few months.
Amazing. Can I ask a technical question, knowing absolutely nothing about sample library development, but just purely from a kind of composer wish list point of view? One of the things that bugs me about a lot of sample libraries is the lack of vibrato speed control. And I know that you've released a couple of libraries, maybe the solo strings libraries, that do have some control over the vibrato speed.
Yes.
I wondered, like, I'd be curious to know anything about the sort of the technical challenges of that, and whether it's mainly like a prohibitively expensive thing to do in the sample world just because it requires that much more time, or whether, I noticed you didn't put vibrato speed in this current sample library.
Well, vibrato speed with a large section hardly seems reasonable because
Right, it's too subtle.
You wouldn't hear it.
Right.
You get 12 violinists playing together, and if they're using vibrato, no matter how fast or slow they're playing, you're not going to hear a difference. What you're going to hear is the intensity.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to solos and maybe even really small chambers,
right,
you're going to hear the difference. So I've never done vibrato speed when it comes to anything more than solos, but I did do vibrato speed in a library that I did a few years ago called Lyric String Quintet.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer your question about the challenge and the expense, it's not that expensive. It's a programming issue.
Right.
You can't, in my opinion, unless there's something that maybe Melodyne can do or whatever. I haven't been convinced about actually really recording different vibrato speeds and then changing it. I know you can do that with time control machine or whatever they call it in Contact, but that comes at a CPU hit.
Yeah.
I've done it by just creating what I believe to be convincing sounding vibrato within the Contact LFO universe.
Yeah.
And then triggering that speed, whether it's with a controller or with what I did once is just use, like, I don't know if you noticed it, I used like a low key switch, and just however fast you play the key switch up and down, and slow it down, that'll trigger the vibrato in such a way. I did do that. I never actually used it though, but I know that a lot of people did. So if I do another solo library, I definitely will be doing vibrato speed control. Always.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm showing my ignorance here as a non-string player, and as more of a.
Yeah, but if you play sax, you use vibrato. So.
But I meant in terms of like you were saying, how basically the bigger the ensemble size,
right,
the vibrato speed is kind of identifiable as like whether it's slow or whether it's fast. It's more a broadening out of the sound. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't say that either. I mean, in the world of string players, vibrato is like the big. That's like the big brass ring. Once you've reached the ability to do a good vibrato, you're a great string player. So that's the thing. You get into any violin section, and when you're playing vibrato, if you were to go and take a mini video of each string player's left hand doing vibrato, you would see all different kinds of speeds. No matter how intense or not, you're going to see different speeds. So what you hear in a large section like that, the differences you hear is just how much vibrato, how intense the vibrato is. Whether you're shaking your hand a lot or just a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's what you really hear.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's so many slight differences of interpretation, I guess, from each player perspective in a section that.
And that's what makes it sound so good.
Right. Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, yeah, thank you. There've been so many little sort of tasty behind the curtain moments for me, just as somebody who uses string libraries or just sample libraries a lot for my day-to-day composing, and then to get a little bit of an insight into how the stuff gets made. And yeah, I want to say thank you again for sending.
You're more than my pleasure. My pleasure. Enjoy the adaptive strings, and keep me in the loop as to your exploration of the library. Yeah, I don't know if you've even tried out the separate sections yet.
I did actually, although mainly in the context of using Divisimate. So I was curious to see, how the ensemble patch sounded compared with controlling multiple legato instruments.
See, I don't even know what Divisimate. What is that? Divisimate? I don't even know what that is.
Yeah. It's this software that allows you. It kind of basically creates a bunch of virtual MIDI imports in your DAW, and then you can play a chord and have it split out the notes to different tracks within your DAW.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. So you can assign each patch to a different MIDI channel, and then the software will decide how many notes you're playing, and therefore, so if you play one note, it's going to assign multiple patches to that because it's just one note.
Yeah, it's like it has a bunch of options as to how it kind of does the logic. But yeah, essentially you can kind of play, for instance, you could play a triad and set it up in a way that it plays like a more spacious kind of string voicing that then gets sent out to tracks 1, 4, and 6 or whatever.
Oh, that's nice to know. Good to know. Then I won't have to develop DVCs anymore. Well, I did. Concert Strings 3 is fully DVC. Right. It has 16. I don't know if you've ever come across it. It's very old now, but it was the first. I don't think that anyone's ever done it yet. That was a lot of programming where you have from a soloist all the way up to 16. So if you play 2 notes, you get 8 players. If you play 3 notes, you get whatever that divides down to. And then if you hold down a note and then release all the other ones, it fades into that one note. It's kind of interesting, but one of these days, maybe I'll do better recordings with that technology.
Is there any DVC related things happening with adaptive strings, or is it more straightforward in how it stacks?
No, I haven't. I did not do any DVC with that. I was going to, and maybe I will if I do the chamber strings. Maybe I'll do those that way, because there might be a call for that. But when you record everything baked in, that's like 12 violins at a time. What is DVC? 12 and 12. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
So I might do that with the chamber strings, but I don't know. When I did when my advertising team did some research about what's out there, and we talked about DVC, there were some libraries that did it, but it didn't seem to be that was the big thing that was drawing people to buy it. It was much more about how it sounded out of the box and how it played out of the box. Those were the 2 main things, regardless, and everything else was a distant second place. So I thought, it's just maybe a future development, but I doubt it.
I don't know how much of a sonic difference it makes in the grand scheme of things compared to how much, difference it makes from the
That's
production.
absolutely right, especially with strings. I'm not saying DVC is not important, because it is, but it's kind of funny. Once I've done these scores, and then once it's in the mix, it's like, okay, a section of 6 and 6, or 12, and if depending on the piece, it doesn't really sound that majorly different to me.
As long as like the chord is balanced, right, or the part is balanced as it should.
That's right.
Doesn't if it's 12 violins or it's 6, the main thing is it playing at the right volume, I guess.
Right. It's all about the mix and the actual composition and counterpoint of the chord that you're composing. So yeah, absolutely. But watch for the chamber strings, and then that could be a different story, because the smaller you get, the more those differences matter. And with brass instruments, for sure, it matters. Brass is a much more opaque sounding instrument than a string. A string is way more transparent.
Yes.
So yeah.
I love that we got a tease for the chamber strings. Would you be okay with me posting the fact that you've got a chamber strings release? Or just this section of the video?
The way I look at it is absolutely. If it doesn't happen, people can go, oh, well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it definitely didn't make any promises.
I got to be honest. I was not going to do chamber strings whatsoever. But as soon as I got about, I would say, halfway into programming this thing, it was like, man, I got to do chamber strings with this. Because it's the smaller the section gets, the less playable it's gonna be. It's the bigger the section, the easier it is to play. It's just because the sound is bigger, you're not going to hear these nuances. And like solo strings are very hard to get a playable thing. I haven't, my own included, I haven't found one that's like, no way, that's not real. But chamber strings are in the middle, so I'm gonna see if I can get them to sound just as good once I get the recording sessions done. I think maybe. Well, let's put it this way. If I do the recording sessions, I'm going to put it out there. And right now, it's kind of on the plan. So yeah, you can say it's going to happen.
Fantastic. Well,
I just don't know what size to use yet. So maybe you can put that in your list of comments. What size chambers do you want?
It's been really valuable, I think, speaking to you, and it's certainly satisfied a bit of my curiosity. So yeah.
Well, you might want to consider doing further interviews, because you're a very good interviewer.
Oh.
I've done interviews in the past, not on camera or anything like that, but I have. And it's not always gone so well.
That's extremely kind. Well, yeah, thank you for your
Alrighty.
time. Yeah, and keep in touch. I'm looking forward to the release. Is there any other information that you wanted me to link to, or anything else that you wanted to sort of publicize while you're here, I suppose?
I'm not a trumpet tutor. I feel like whatever you think is valuable for you and your listeners or whoever's in your circle, that's completely up to you. I'm just here to answer questions. I'm not here to shill anything. You know, that's been my downfall probably, but I just don't do that. That's why I finally had to hire an ad team, because like I don't know how to advertise or anything. So yeah. Which is why no one knows about me. I was surprised going on YouTube. It's like, hey, how come I'm not known on all these string comparisons and stuff? I'm like, I got to get out there. So I called what's his name and said, hey, let's do something different here. So here we are.
Good luck with that. Good luck. I hope you find success. And yeah, all the more power to you. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care and keep in touch.
Yes. Bye.
Goodbye.